So now we have electromagnetic ecology and compatibility. Relations between noise elements in electrotechnical engineering, the lack of knowledge which causes considerable losses. This entire problem must be also reflected in the future in the area of standardization. Modern utilization of electric power is always related by virtue of natural laws to the formation of electrostatic, magnetic, and electromagnetic fields. This omnipresent, useful, and today indispensable part of modern life has specific negative effects in many sectors of the production-consumption chain, effects which ruin the pleasure from the contribution of progress not only in industry, but also, for example, in culture, health services, and elsewhere. The consumption, conversion, distribution, transmission, and production of electric power constitutes classic schemes of heavy current problems. With the start of industrial as well as heavy electronics, it seems that the differences as compared to the previous clear-cut weak current area of utilization of electric power are disappearing, that is, with regard to the application of small amounts of power or low voltages. As examples which can perhaps illustrate best the type and method of applying unpleasant features which accompany modern application of electric power, we select further the application of electric power for transmission of information for purposes of control and regulation. From this, there are derived generalizing conclusions which can be applied also outside of these selected applications, with orientation to international connections in this scientific technical development and in problems of standardization. Useful application of electricity is accompanied by the effects of electromagnetic fields, which may disrupt other processes or phenomena taking place in their proximity. The concept of proximity is understood in this context mostly as spatial and electric proximity of two phenomena, spatial being geometric and electric related. At the same time, the second phenomenon under observation, in addition to the useful application, may be, but does not have to be, participating directly in the first phenomenon, process. A sort of deception exists in the spatial or time incidence of the occurrence of the conditions which lead to the undesirable disruptive connection. The interference is often related to the mediating effect through parts, members, or phenomena which otherwise do not participate in the process. Maximum possible combinations are represented by cases when an interference field is formed and is manifested by its effects in terms of space and time in such a valuable way that it is beyond the experience of the team of expert construction engineers, research workers, and testing technicians. Under closer scrutiny, it is found that even a slight oversight is enough for the fine mechanism of the interference chain to fall apart before one succeeds in finding out and identifying its parts. In contrast, interfering arrangement, which is very striking, is not taken in consideration precisely because it is so obvious. All this must be prevented by taking suitable measures. However, in order to restore these measures, it is necessary in some cases to have a good amount of fantasy and experience. In this connection, professional circles in the world are beginning to consider the interference purity of the environment, ether, in the same way as the purity of the air and water. Disturbing influences literally flood increasingly larger areas, mainly places with a high concentration of industry and dense urban agglomeration, which means an ecological problem par excellence, should read par excellence, and at the same time to the extent that originally purely technical questions become economic problems and pertain to the life of not only an individual but of the entire society. How did this qualitative jump occur, and how is it occurring now? Up to a certain time, interference voltage influenced by its negative effects only the so-called weak current applications of electricity. it is characteristic that fields which presented little interference, mostly dispersion fields, as a rule did not affect heavy current applications of electric power. That is why, at the beginning, the fields which dealt with these problems were those which have been affected by them most: broadcasting, communications, and railways. The method of solving the problem is also illuminating. Preparation of technical norms which created conditions for uninterrupted, and therefore also safe, operations in the given area. Specific measures were as a rule one-sided, and economical management of investments in other branches of the national economy was not always taken in consideration. From the point of view of standardization, a similar approach is used on the international scale, especially because broadcasting, communications, and railroads represent areas of broad international interest, where there was and is urgent need for recommendations and norms. Within the framework of the IEC, these questions have been handled since 1933, for example at the cost of a different organizational structure of the appropriate specialized organ, International Special Committee for Radio Interference, abbreviated CISPR, and at the cost of a different way of publishing sectional results of its activities. It is true that subsequent solutions of these questions within the framework of the SKN of CEMA involves a uniform type of CEMA recommendations, but substantially it deals, should read does not deal, with uniform methods of solving the problem. Modern utilization of electric power for data processing and in the automation of processes, mainly technological processes, is characterized on the one hand by the application of low voltages, and on the other hand by the beginning of the use of non-linear semiconducting parts, both in industrial electronics as well as in the electrification system itself. In particular, the application of tyristors in high-output installations results in a great increase of outputs of higher harmonic frequencies, not only in the installations of the users themselves, but in the entire power distribution network. Interference voltage also began to be affected negatively by heavy current application of electricity. At the same time, it is equally characteristic that at the present time strong interference fields in the form of interference voltages or currents are not restricted to individual equipment or installation in a given facility, but are often dragged to great distances. The medium of this interference connection consists as a rule not only of disrupting dispersion fields in the area around the given facility, as it happened before, but direct electric connections in the heavy current power lines themselves. The seemingly little sensitive huge organism of power systems is being attacked by low current interference throughout its entire field of activity, and at the most sensitive places, at the place of production, electric power plant, and consumption households, not excluding distribution network and power lines. With the introduction of computer technology in the control of industrial processes, exceptionally great difficulties occur with regard to interference voltages on a large scale. The source of power themselves, namely electric power plants, are not remaining aside and are not spared of the positive as well as negative aspects of this process. This measuring central organ at the inlet of the computer is connected with the technological process by means of hundreds to thousands of sensors, which are connected with a complicated bundle of measuring cables, several hundred meters to several kilometers long. These sensitive nerve terminals, which operate with very low voltages, are exposed throughout their entire course by the effects of all kinds of interference fields. In the case of the classic direct method of evaluation of the incoming signals, which carry information about magnitudes measured by measuring instruments of the dial type, alternate interference voltages do not affect the measurements, even when they are several times stronger than the useful signal. frequency characteristics and low impedance of the dial instrument guarantee that the evaluation is made correctly, even in the presence of interference. As the number of the covered measuring points increases and the system switches from analog to digital processing, called digitalization, for input in the control computer, the original information which is required may be suppressed entirely by the interference voltages. Reversely, the computer may receive a false signal, which it did not originate at the measuring place of the technological process, but somewhere along the course of the measuring cable. One can use in this case direct analogy with the so-called sequential automatic machines, which use at the inlet very low voltages, and therefore only slight amounts of power. For the control of the input logical circuits, which in addition operate at a high impedance, an incorrect interference by the control and regulatory equipment, which is not protected against the effects of interference, impulses, or voltages, may result in a minimal economic loss. At the opposite end of the distribution network of electric power, there is, for example, our household, and an electric meter at one of its power inlets. This watt-hour counter is both a measuring instrument for the consumption of electric power from the distribution network, and at the same time, it is an indicator of the extent to which we ourselves create at home an artificial environment. It's a nice way to look at it. Naturally, this costs more money. It costs money both to the society, the distributor, considered as the supplier on the one hand, and ourselves as consumers on the other hand. Both partners in this direct monetary ratio rely on the idea that the electrometer does the measuring correctly. That is why it is also tested officially. The catch is that the conditions for which the electrometer has been designed, manufactured, tested, and finally used are changing at the present time. The use of mostly induction electrometers for measuring the active output of electric current under conditions of non-sinusoidal course of the curve of the current represents today a method of measurement which is demonstrably less appropriate. When appliances with semiconducting parts are switched on, the originally single-wave course of the current, 50 cycles per second, turns into multi-wave currents. These multi-wave currents are integrated by the electrometer, and this causes much greater errors, and these errors are by no means within the tolerance of the tested grade of accuracy, which means that there is no error in the design, manufacture, or testing, but rather an error due to changes of the conditions for which the induction watt-hour electrometers were designed. An increase of the content of higher harmonic components of the basic frequency in the distribution itself of the electric power. But the worst cases of interference voltage are those where there is danger to the service personnel or danger to various installations, particularly telecommunication installations in cases of short circuits on high voltage power lines. The amplitude of the interference voltage induced in parallel communication cables, metal pipes and constructions grounded in close proximity of the short circuit on a high voltage power line reaches as much as thousands of volts. It is true that the entire phenomenon occurs within a limited time interval, but on the other hand, the induced voltage is dragged through underground installations at distances of several kilometers from the place of origin. With the exception of power lines of exceptionally high voltage, this does not pose a new unknown problem. These situations on high voltage and very high voltage power lines are defined in electrotechnical regulations with a relative degree of accuracy. And there are also measures prescribed which must be observed for reasons of safety and possible secondary danger in the construction of power lines and their operation. However, from the general point of view, it is worthwhile to consider the question as to what should be done when modern measuring, control, and regulatory installations cannot be fully effective because of interference voltages. When these installations increase the productivity of human labour in a literally revolutionary way, or when on the other hand output semiconductors can make savings of the received power without unnecessary losses. And while generally speaking, interference can result in danger to material values and human life, there is no other way but to spend money to eliminate interference fields, voltages, currents, and to fight against their indirect effects. In contrast to this active approach, it may also be possible to wait and depend on larger amounts to liquidate the subsequent material losses, but that certainly is not a solution. In addition, losses in terms of human health cannot be measured by these values. Naturally, there also exist economic sanctions based on the application and validity of norms which have been agreed to at the state level or international level. Norms which force potential producers of interference voltages and fields to study in greater detail, and especially to study systematically the theory and practice of the formulation of such interference and of the elimination of its effects. In view of the nature of the effects of interference, one cannot very well calculate today the cost of its elimination and to include it in operational costs, thereby avoiding the problem of pollution of the environment, as it is still done sometimes when dealing with the problems of air and water pollution. A contributory factor in this is the deceptive effect of interference fields and voltages, which was mentioned previously, and which in many cases turns immediately against its creator and strikes him at the sensitive points of his blood circulation. If we can use for comparison purposes the well-known comparison of the function of electric power in the economic organism, underground operations and constructions such as mines and subways are not exempt from these problems either. What represents a separate chapter, which sometimes borders on science fiction, are interferences in electronic equipment used in medicine and their mutual interaction in the same way as mutual interferences of television sets connected inappropriately by a pole-type interchangeable connector with a joint power network outlet. Effective use of means allocated for finding the causes of the formation of interference voltages or on liquidation of the consequences of their effects is today beginning to exceed the framework of one single national economy and represents a suitable and up-to-date subject for international cooperation in the broadest sense of the word. As exchange of electric power continues to increase between power systems, for example on the European scale, and above all within the framework of the uniform power system of the countries of the socialist camp, there will be necessarily problems of interference which will have to be dealt with in connection with studies of the quality of the exchanged electric power. On the other hand, for example, the present advantage of deliveries of whole investment units to foreign countries with key may be only a temporary advantage as compared to sub-deliveries of technological lines and installations precisely because of the problem of interference. Also, what has to be considered as an effective step is the development of bilateral cooperation within the framework of the CEMA countries. The goal of this cooperation should be a gradual transition to multilateral cooperation. What applies today to the area of scientific technical operation continues to be applicable in the future with regard to standardization. At the same time, the gathering of experience and the corresponding exchange cannot stop before reaching also a broader international forum, such as, for example, the IEC. The results achieved in Czechoslovakia also confirm the fact that it truly pays off to proceed in a complex manner, as provided for in the corresponding state program. In this respect, the handling of seemingly general problems such as electromagnetic compatibility or electromagnetic ecology brings specific results. Let us mention at random the production of a screened measuring table, independent destination of reduction factors on the side of communication and power lines, supplement to the Czechoslovak norm CSN 34-2030, or progress in uniform evaluation of the effects of both components of an electromagnetic field by the method of evaluation of interferences by connecting channels. In the fight for preservation of bearable living conditions, when all available natural sources of power are being mobilized, man is making great efforts to develop technology and especially to make further progress in it. This progress cannot be stopped, and at the same time one cannot conceive it without an active role of the human factor. However, with regard to the results achieved, one must also accept the negative results of such behaviour and not wait until some bright idea may occur, which is not defined in greater detail and may occur, let us say, at the end of this century. At the same time, until the end of the century, there is relatively enough time to reject the view that these negative effects of industrial progress in particular may be somewhat objective, even though they are not at all acceptable. They are considered as if they came somewhere from the outside, instead of being understood as the result of rational considerations concerning the need for proper control of all activities which stimulate progress and broader application of scientific technical discoveries. This in spite of the fact that in some cases there predominates the feeling of being sorry about the fact that those whose duty it is to inform the public do not do so, because they see only one side of the intricated problems, the external side of them. At the first sight, it looks like a paradox. If technicians, and therefore also electrotechnical engineers in the case of interference, want to demonstrate their own technical capability, they must by themselves find a solution of the dilemma that either 1. They do not know how to explain anything and cannot be suspected of technocratism, or they are able to explain everything and may be suspected of being prejudiced. In reality, it means that they must be able to demonstrate that they can find a solution outside of their own profession and draw the proper conclusions from it for themselves. This is a difficult task. At the beginning, they will agree with the others, and the protection of their living environment appears to them, who are technicians, as being an ecological problem. Electrotechnicians add a word, electromagnetic ecology, and draw conclusions for themselves. The discovery and use of electric power results in creation of artificial environments, in hunting for distant natural conditions, by which man deliberately surrounds himself more and more. At the same time, he creates problems of mutually similar type. Depending on what aspect will be followed in the future, we shall talk about the corresponding type of ecology. And so, electrotechnical engineers will define later on electromagnetic ecology, and immediately after that, electromagnetic compatibility. This applies especially to electrotechnical and electronic products or distribution networks. They will see the difference in the fact that the aspect under study, that is the interference, in brackets, interference field, voltage, current, affects directly only the users of the equipment or appliances themselves, or it affects also other individuals, the public, the community, or the society as a whole. The problem of solving these questions calls directly for adaptation, streamlining, and codification of norms or regulations. This should be done as soon as possible in international documents, so that a few years from now one would not hear comments that, and so on. Standardizers acting in harmonious cooperation with electrotechnical engineers have a new content to deal with. This content is certainly not easy in terms of formulation, but it is also complex in terms of applying the results in practice. It is relatively easy to determine that in addition to the given human aspects of the present need for dealing with certain general ecological questions, there exists a certain driving motor which results in the need for dealing with the problems of interference. This is almost certainly the fact that manufacturers and especially distributors of electric power are, in contrast to the past, confronted with their consumers, and the consumers are beginning to demand a certain quality of energy which is being delivered to them. However, at the same time, the non-linear properties of the use of electric power on the part of the consumers is, to put it simply, having a bad effect on the efforts of the suppliers. In fact, this effect is such that they cause more difficulties sometimes to the suppliers than to themselves. Distribution systems represent on the one hand a binding factor between the two partners, but on the other hand a suitable environment which within a short time may become infected unbearably by a defect in the form of interference, if they let things develop as they have been developing up to now. The demand for standardization at the international level was accepted, and so the IEC decided in 1973 at its session in Munich to create a technical commission, number 77, electromagnetic compatibility between electric instruments, including networks. For the time being, the area of interest of the TC77 concentrates on preparation of international recommendations pertaining to electromagnetic compatibility of electric or electronic instruments with regard to each other and with regard to electric distribution networks. At the same time, the program of the operations of the Technical Commission number 77 will be coordinated with other technical commissions of the IEC, which are interested in these problems, but outside of the framework of the CISPR. The preceding sentence is also an expression of the fact that in addition to a broader study of the problems of electromagnetic compatibility, that is, problems of electromagnetic ecology, it will be necessary to take in consideration the results of the studies made by the CISPR, particularly in terms of the working methods, standardization of the methods of measurement, and determination of the limits of interference effects, and especially in the creation of terminology. Also, specialized internal organizations are being invited to participate in this on a broad scale. This applies, for example, to the CCIR, the International Consulting Committee for Radio, CCIT, the International Consulting Committee for Telephone and Telegraph, the UTE, International Union for Electric Heat, CIGRE, International Conference on Electric Systems of Very High Voltage, CIRED, International Conference on Distribution of Electricity, the UNIPEDE, International Union of Producers and Distributors of Energy, and others. While the TC77 deals with problems of electromagnetic compatibility, the Action Committee of the IEC retains the control and framework handling of the problems of electromagnetic ecology. Its special work team of 5 members, whose activities have been reported previously in the press, has proposed a definition of both main concepts for purposes of various technical commissions and subcommissions of the IEC. Electromagnetic ecology, a study of relationship between electrically live elements and the resulting electromagnetic environment, natural environment as well as artificial environment. Note, we are dealing with an analogy and definition of ecology, which deals with the study of relations between living creatures and the natural environment. Electromagnetic compatibility, an element of electromagnetic environment, is compatible if its mutual reaction with other elements of this environment is acceptable. This led to the creation of a conceptual basis for studies of other tasks, which include specifically the preparation of a survey of technical problems in the area of electromagnetic compatibility, with delimitation of studies carried out so far and other needs involving the use of the results or continue to be dealt with in cooperation with other technical commissions of the IEC. This includes analysis of available information obtained from the CISPR and TC77, which will lead to a proposal of measures to be taken by the Action Committee of the IEC. In view of the need for standardization coverage of the problem, this involves also proposals of suitable internal and external relations of the IEC by means of mixed working groups consisting of representatives of the interested organizations. Last but not least, it is a preparation of proposals for the Action Committee to standardize specific functional characteristics of instruments in view of electromagnetic compatibility. So we've got a bibliography here. Interesting bibliography. It says State Program. Normalize ACE. Marova Technica. Interesting. Okay, we're on to the next paper. I think this might be the last one. Biological effect of millimeter radio waves. Research of Institute of Microbiology, Vaccines, and Sarah Emini Mekhinov. So the text: morphological, functional, and biochemical studies conducted in humans and animals revealed that millimeter waves cause changes in the body manifested in structural alterations in the skin and internal organs, qualitative and quantitative changes of the blood and bone marrow composition, and changes of the conditioned reflex activity, tissue respiration, activity of enzymes participating in the process of tissue respiration, and nucleic metabolism. The degree of unfavorable effect of millimeter waves depended on the duration of the radiation and individual characteristics of the organism. The ubiquitous propagation of radio waves, radio broadcasting, and television is contributing to the appearance of a new physical factor: electromagnetic waves of the radio frequency range. In recent years, it has been established that radio waves of different ranges have an unfavorable influence on the organism. The literature data, and there's a list of researchers there, testify that long stay in conditions of the effect of radio waves, the DM and CM ranges, leads to the change of the functions of the nervous, cardiovascular, and other systems of the organism, with the development of a characteristic complex of symptoms which permit speaking of a special non-zoological form of disease, radio wave disease. However, in the literature there is almost no information about the biological effect of radio frequencies of the millimeter range, although that range is widely used in technology, and the question of its biological activity has acquired special urgency. The goal of the present investigations consisted in study of the physiological and biochemical processes lying at the basis of the changes which occur in animals as a result of the effect of radio waves in the range of 5 to 8 millimeters at a density of the flow of power of 1 milliwatt per centimeter squared. The investigations were conducted on rats of the Wistar line and mice of the CBA line, irradiated for 15 minutes daily in the course of 60 days, in the volume resonator of an experimental installation working on the basis of a type OV12 generator. Study of the morphological, functional, and biochemical indicators which play an essential role in the formation of reactions of the organism disclosed various disorders in the experimental animals. As is known, the energy of millimeter waves, because of its weak penetrating ability, is absorbed primarily and mainly by the skin. Our investigations have shown that in the skin of irradiated animals, deformation of the receptor apparatus and well-expressed changes of a reactive character were observed. In the skin layer, properly speaking, appeared bunches of nerve fibers with hypertrophy of a portion of the fiber and sections with demyelinization. In the dermis, among the collagen fibers, were small trunks of various thickness, the neural conductors of which were fragmented in separate cases, and phenomena of demyelinization were observed in the surface layers. As the results of histomorphological analysis showed, in the functionally active structures of tissue of the myocardium, liver, kidneys, and spleen, disorders of the hemodynamics were established, with disruption of the permeability of the vesicular membranes. The appearance the appearance of myconecrosis and subsequent tissue dystrophy. Moreover, qualitative and quantitative shifts were revealed in the erythrocytic and leukocytic composition of the blood of irradiated animals, indicating suppression of the hemopoietic function of the bone marrow and lymphatic system. Noted in the composition of the red blood was eosinophilia, neutrophilia, and lymphopenia, and lowering of the hemoglobin level and reduction of the number of erythrocytes were observed, which was determined to a considerable degree by the retention of erythrocytes in the bone marrow. In the latter occurred an increase of the number of erythroblastic cells and decrease of cells of the leukoblastic series. So I'd just like to stop there for a moment and read that tiny bit again. Noted in the composition of the red blood was eosinophilia, neutrophilia, and lymphopenia, and lowering of the hemoglobin level, and reduction of the number of erythrocytes were observed. So if you're lowering the hemoglobin level, you're therefore going to lower the oxygen level going into the body. And this was a very long time ago that this was written. So it's very pertinent to today, it's very hard to speak, to today and what's going on with the coronavirus and things like that. Under the effect of millimeter waves of low intensity, the degree of affection depends on the general condition of the organism, and evidently is not so great, as the observed disorders are in the main reversible. It does take months, though, as we've seen in previous papers. A characteristic feature of the biological effect of radio waves was changes of the state of various sections of the central and vegetative nervous systems, which involve directly or indirectly disorders of the principal functions of the organisms. As a result of investigations conducted by us on animals irradiated with millimeter waves, disorders of conditioned reflex activity have been established, weakening of the stimulatory process, reduction of the size of the latent period in response to different conditioned stimuli, light, noise, or pain, and disinhibition or differentiation reactions. Disorders of the stimulatory and inhibitory processes displayed in animals during the repeated effects of millimeter radio waves can be considered suppression of the function of the central nervous system, although the developed inhibition can be linked with protective compensatory reaction of the organism in response to irradiation. So adaptation, that is. In the blood plasma of irradiated animals, the content of 17 oxycorticosteroids in, I can't read that word, eased, 22.64 plus minus 2.18 mkg per 100 mils of plasma of the irradiated, and 14.98 plus or minus 2.01 mkg of the unirradiated. Along with that, in the adrenal cortex of the rats irradiated by millimeter waves, the ascorbic acid level dropped. I can't read that. I think it says 32%, possibly. The functional changes established in the content of 17 OCS in the blood plasma and of ascorbic acid in the adrenal cortex of irradiated animals indicate the influence of millimeter radio waves on the central components of the hypothalamus hypophysis system, the adrenal glands with involvement of a number of humoral components. The conducted investigation showed that in animals subjected to the effect of millimeter radio waves, there was a variation of the content and ratio of catecholamines. In the blood, the concentration increased. In the hypothalamus, the adrenaline content increased, and the noradrenaline level dropped. In the cerebral cortex, there was a slight redistribution of catecholamines. In the adrenal glands, the adrenaline content doubled, and the noradrenaline level dropped by 11%. In comparison with that in unirradiated animals. The adrenaline concentration in the adrenal glands remained elevated by 60% 10 days after the irradiation ceased. Wow, that is amazing. The adrenaline concentration in the adrenal glands remained elevated by 60% 10 days after the irradiation ceased. So in other words, it makes you super stressed. Your body is super stressed. The obtained results indicate well-expressed changes of metabolism of catecholamines under the influence of millimeter waves, both in the hormonal and in the sympathetic components of the sympathetic adrenal system, and also reflect changes of the functional activity of its hormonal and mediator components. The main mass of the energy in tissues and organs of animal organisms, as is known, is released during the biological oxidation of organic substances, in which case the greater part of it is accumulated in the form of macroergs. The processes of bioenergetics occurring mainly in the mitochondria, with the direct participation of respiratory enzymes which accomplish the terminal stage of biological oxidation, are of universal importance and assure the functional activity of organs and tissues, the synthesis of proteins and nucleic acids, the formation of some intermediate products of exchange, etc. The conducted investigation showed that the irradiation of animals by millimeter waves caused changes of the process of oxidative phosphorylation in the liver, kidneys, heart and brain of the animals. The irradiation inhibited the oxygen consumption rate by the mitochondria of those organs in the active phosphorylating state and slowed down the rate of respiration upon exhaustion of the ATP. Wow. In the liver and kidneys of irradiated animals, the intensity of phosphorylation decreased by 64%. The values of the respiratory controls decreased by 26 and 28 respectively %, and the changes were less expressed in the heart and brain. The established disorders of the process of conjugative oxidative phosphorylation in the mitochondria of irradiated animals testify to suppression of energy exchange and can be a result of changes occurring in the electron transport chain. The expressed hypothesis was confirmed by the results of investigations of the activity of enzymes and participating in the processes of tissue respiration. In the mitochondria of the livers of irradiated animals, the succinate dehydrogenase activity increased by 34%, and the cytochrome oxidase activity decreased by 37%. Those data testify to destruction of the cytochrome chain. Very essential in the system of enzymes of cell energy supply is the role of the ATPases, regulating the processes of formation and use of the energy of macroergs. ATP and mitochondria, basically your energy powerhouse. The conducted investigations revealed in the mitochondria of the livers of irradiated animals an increase of ATPase activity by 63%, as compared with similar indicators for the unirradiated. In that case, in the liver and spleen of animals irradiated many times by millimeter waves, there was a decrease of the content of adenyl nucleotides by 61 and 68% respectively. Investigation of the influence of millimeter waves on the state of nucleic exchange showed that in the liver, spleen, kidneys, lungs and heart there was a reduction of the content of nucleic acids and suppression of the rate of C-thymidine in DNA and C-uridine in RNA. In a comparison of the results of quantitative determination of nucleic acids It was established that the rate of inclusion of the predecessor in RNA and its content in the organs changes less than the DNA. The change of the nucleic acid concentration was more expressed in the liver, spleen and kidneys than in the heart and lungs. Together with reduction of the nucleic acid content, the quantity of acid-soluble products in the liver and spleen of irradiated animals increased by 35 and 43%. And the activity of ribonuclease and DNase increased 50%. Under the influence of radio waves, the protein spectrum of the blood serum changed, the albumin content decreased and the number of globulins increased, which led to decrease of the value of the albumin globulin coefficient, and the number of free amino acids decreased by 22%. An indicator of the reduced level of protein synthesis in the irradiated animals also was the established reduction of the rate of inclusion of C-methionine in proteins of the liver, spleen, lymph nodes and thymus. The presented data testify to substantial changes in the protein metabolism which occur under the influence of multiple irradiation of animals by millimeter radio waves. Evidently, the reduction of the general energy level occurring in the organism under the influence of millimeter radio waves had an effect on the formation of macroergs and caused a suppression of all functions of the organism, including a suppression of synthetic processes, but especially of nuclear protein metabolism, which is very energy consuming. The conducted experimental investigations were compared with observations of the state of health of 97 persons working with generators of the millimeter range on the basis of systematic conducting of biochemical analysis. The obtained data confirmed the existence of an influence of radio waves on the state of metabolic processes in the organism. In particular, changes of the indicators of protein and carbohydrate metabolism were revealed, and disturbances of the indicators of immunobiological reactivity and of the blood system were established. Thus, the conducted investigations indicate high biological activity and an unfavorable influence of millimeter radio waves on the organism. The expressness of the biological reactions increased with increase of the period of irradiation and depended on individual characteristics of the organism. So that's quite a powerful paper there to show that EMF does all kinds of things to the body. Okay, this one is a short one, it's the last one. Effect, oh, I shouldn't have meant that, no, it's okay. Effect of the Earth's magnetic field on some regulatory functions in healthy persons. This would be interesting. A physiological mathematical model and correlation analysis combined with the determination of general parameters were used to evaluate the effect of external physical factors on the physiological indices in healthy persons and to evaluate mitotropic reactions. The changes in regulatory functions of man in the course of adaptation to conditions in the European north are especially great in winter. A close, non-linear correlation was detected between changes in the Earth's magnetic field and fluctuations in the excretion of 17 ketosteroids and weighted mean skin temperature. The authors propose a program, heliomagnetic and meteorological factors in the process of adaptation. The authors propose a program of research entitled Adaptation and the Life Support System on human adaptation to unfavorable natural conditions in the area where the Baikal-Amur Railway is under construction. The external factors that act on the body are subdivided into adequate, corresponding to the phenotypic properties of the body, and inadequate. Adaptive reactions arise in response to external factors, adaptation syndrome, and breakdown of adaptation with different outcomes. It is suggested that mathematical models of the functioning of the body as a whole or of its individual systems can be regarded as a standard. The heliogeometeorological factors are among the constituents of the life support system of the region. Climatic conditions in the area of the Baikal-Amur Railway are inadequate for people coming from the European USSR. The characteristics of the constituents of the meteorological regime include calculation of the means, their errors, standard deviations, and coefficient of variation. The weather complex is judged either by a Sukin's formula or by the Fedorov-Chubikov method. A comparison of weather evaluations with the physiological functions of individual groups of people is used to construct physiological mathematical models that could help to predict the health of the people living in the given region. It is suggested that the following be determined in order to define the role of individual factors in altering the physiological functions of the body. 1. Threshold of force of a stimulus, i.e. the minimum value of a factor that causes a functional deviation, and 2. Time during which the functional deviation takes place after change in the external factor. Complete correlation analysis with algorithm 18, according to Plotkinski, is used for the former. For the latter, i.e., to determine the relationship between physical and physiological factors. I can't read what that says. Mutual correlative functions are determined between the quantities regarded as two ergodic processes. Use of the physiological mathematical model made it possible to establish the threshold values of each factor and the time intervals of its action. Analysis revealed the physiological parameters that clearly respond to change in the physical factors: weighted mean skin temperature, rate of blood flow, and urinary excretion of 17 ketosteroids. The most sensitive to fluctuations of the meteorological factors are humoral regulation, mental and emotional sphere, cardiovascular system, water-salt homeostasis, and respiratory system. Use of the proposed methods will be of value in predicting the health status of populations in relation to the climate in particular regions. And that's the end of the document. This was declassified and approved for release in 2012, and I think 10th of May 2012. And I'll go back up to the top so you can see it again. This was written 3rd of August 1977. It's a long time. Declassified in 2012. So why did it take so long to get declassified? Why? There's lots of good information in this. It's very pertinent to our time. The effects of non-ionizing electromagnetic radiation. It's a very hot topic right now. These are the contents, just in case you're joining in late. Arterial pressure, reactivity of bone, megakaryocytes, contraction function of the myocardium in patients suffering from rheumatoid arthritis, the effect of different SHF energy levels, that's super high frequency, on the functional state of the body, effects on the organism of brief daily exposure to low frequency electromagnetic fields, the influence of the electric field of electric power transmission lines for the communication line service personnel, electric and magnetic properties of biological membranes, electromagnetic ecology and compatibility, biological effect of millimeter radio waves, the effect of the Earth's magnetic field on some regulatory functions in healthy persons, and heliogeomagnetic and meteorological factors in the process of adaptation. Now I'll probably split all these videos up, so it just deals with one at a time, as this has turned into a very long video. But I like to read things thoroughly, so then when I talk about them, I have the correct knowledge and I'm able to converse well. So I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time.